going to go directly to China, where the State Department has brokered a very suspect deal with the government there concerning the release of human rights lawyer and dissident Chen Guangcheng from the embassy, our embassy in Beijing. A senior State Department official, Kurt Campbell, explained the situation as follows to NPR just a few moments ago. Quote, Mr. Chen made clear from the outset he wanted to go back to China. He's lived a very difficult life. He's a person of struggle. I think he anticipates clearly when he goes back into society there are going to be challenges. We simply feel that we have, through our support and the support from nonprofits and civil society, that we have created the parameters for him to be perhaps a little bit more effective with a little bit more safety. There are no guarantees, and China is moving into a period of enormous complexity, end quote. Here to make sense of all these new developments is Minky Worden, the editor of China's Great Leap, the director of Global Initiatives for Human Rights Watch, and a former aide to Hong Kong Democratic Party founder Martin Lee. Minky, welcome.
Thank you.
Minky, for those of us who haven't followed the most recent news, bring us up to date. What is now going on with Mr. Chen in Beijing?
Well, it's been an incredibly dramatic week for China, for U.S.-China relations. You have the twin scandals of the Bo-Xilai collapse of one party boss, and then you have an unprecedented situation since 1989 of a Chinese legal activist seeking refuge inside the U.S. embassy. The resolution of that today, I think, has taken everybody by surprise. It is apparently that Chen left of his, well, he left U.S. protection and went to the hospital.
Of his own volition?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Because the he is now telling AP and his colleague activists that in fact he received threats that he would be returned to the same, he and his family would be returned to the same abusive officials who really made his life a living hell since 2005. And this is, just to be clear what we're talking about here, he was imprisoned, he served a long prison term, he was tortured, he's been denied food, medical attention, even his tiny daughter was denied the ability to attend school. So we're talking about officials who have demonstrated a complete ability to withstand international scrutiny, disregard for the rule of law, and the idea that he and his family could somehow be returned to them and with safety is a little bit dubious.
We're talking to Minky Worden of Human Rights Watch. Minky, is the way that the State Department dealt with Mr. Chen representative of how the U.S. has historically handled human rights dissidents like this?
Yeah, I think the U.S. has long wrestled. Every single administration has wrestled with the question of human rights. But I think they've really looked at it in the wrong way. The U.S. has a manifest interest in the rule of law in China.
Why?
And, well, it goes to everything that we do. Economically speaking, it goes to the sanctity of contracts. It goes to your arbitration not going wrong. It goes to your business partner not kidnapping and killing you, as happened in Neil Haywood. So I think the broader problem of the rule of law in China, the reason why Chen Guangcheng is such an interesting case is because he's become something of a folk hero in China. His case resonates with ordinary Chinese people who have suffered the depredations of the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay, but what do you make of Mr. Campbell's comments just now? There are no guarantees, and we've perhaps made him a little bit more effective with a little bit more safety. What message does that send to the Chinese people?
Well, actually, there are guarantees, and the U.S. has a lot of leverage with China. The U.S. has always had a lot of leverage with China.
How so?
We don't always use it, but the U.S. has a lot of things. The Chinese government has a lot of things that it wants from China. This week, the entire top tier of U.S. leadership happens to be in Beijing for the Strategic Economic Dialogue.
Yes.
So we are in the most advantageous position to negotiate a good outcome for Chen and his family. I don't think that it's clear at all that we have done that.
Okay, very briefly, I'm correct in remembering that we sheltered Tiananmen Square dissidents, one of whom for a year. Yes or no?
Fang Lizhi was sheltered in the Beijing embassy. There is a real parallel between his case and Chen Guangcheng's case as well, because they were both reformists who were pushing from within China, who wanted to stay and work inside China to advance reform. And that is manifestly in the United States' interest. interest.
Minky, what happens if the United States doesn't stand up for human rights in China? I'm recalling Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's first visit, where she said, actually, we really want to talk about climate change. Human rights isn't really at the top of our agenda. What happened after that? Is it important for the U.S. to lead on this, or do other countries lead in our absence?
Well, the messages that the United States sends are heard and received. So the message that was sent there was that human rights are secondary, or if it at best. So if you downgrade human rights in the list of strategic priorities, you've sent a very dangerous message. And indeed, that trip and those statements were followed by probably the worst period of repression that we've seen since Tiananmen Square in 1989. But worst of all, it's really abandoning the human rights defenders, people like Chen Guangcheng, but also Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who have fought very courageously for decades within the system to improve it. And just to the to the argument that these are strategic concerns and human rights is not strategic, we have to disagree, because if you, for example, if climate change is your priority, what do you do about all of the environmental activists who are being harassed and beaten up for exposing cancer villages and environmental degradation? You don't, unless you emphasize human rights, you don't have a principled case to make in your other so-called strategic interests.
Well, we're going to have to leave it at that. Minky Worden of Human Rights Watch, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this.